Hello students, myself Satish Kumar Konigala, Assistant Professor, School of Pharmaceutical Sciences, Vignan Foundation for Science Technology Research, Guntur. In previous video, we discussed about the antihistaminic agents. In that we covered about introduction to histamine, how it is synthesized, where it is stored, what are the pharmacological activities, how it is metabolized, and what is the relationship between the acid secretion and histamine activity. And then after we discussed about the antihistaminic agents classification. In that we particularly discussed about the H1 antagonists. So in this video we are going to discuss about general structural activity relationship of antihistaminic agents, particularly H1 antagonists, and then after we are going to discuss about some important antihistaminic agents along their synthesis, properties and pharmacological uses. So let us see one by one. The structural activity relationship. So here we discussed about the general structural activity relationship of H1 antagonist. So here structural activity relationship is nothing but when there is a change in this structure of a particular compound, what is the ultimate activity or what is the activity it can able to produce. So that relationship is explained in case of structural activity relationship. That means when there is a change in the chemical structure of particular compound, the ultimate action what it produces is discussed in this particular structural activity relationship. So here in case of H1 antagonist, the general structure of H1 antagonist, as we know that they are like this. That means it consisting of X atom and there is a terminal nitrogen. So the X atom may be variant, it may be like nitrogen or carbon or sometimes oxygen also. So this is the general structure of H1 antagonist. So in this structure or general structure or basic structure of H1 antagonist, the terminal nitrogen should be required to show the antihistaminic activity. So without this terminal nitrogen, the H1 antagonist doesn't show the antihistaminic activity. So for H1 antagonistic activity, the terminal nitrogen should be required. That is the first requirement for this H1 antagonist. Second one is some of the H1 antagonists. In some of the H1 antagonists, the terminal nitrogen is entered into the heterocyclic structures. Terminal nitrogen is entered into the heterocyclic structures. So some of the examples are peribenzyamine and thiolini. So these are the two examples. In this terminal nitrogen is entered into the heterocyclic structures. So that is another requirement. And third one is the X atom. It may be like hydrogen. It may be like. Third requirement is the X atom. So it may be nitrogen, carbon or oxygen, and this will be connected to the terminal nitrogen through
ethyl linkage.
So then only it shows the maximum antihistaminic activity. So when this
ethyl linkage
is changed, for example in case of when the carbon is increased or the carbon is branched. So in that two cases, the antihistaminic activity of that particular compound is decreased. That means
ethyl group is
required between the X atom and terminal nitrogen, then only it shows the maximum activity. When there is a branching or the carbon chain number is increased, that may lead to decreasing the antihistaminic activity. And another requirement is, as I said that in previous point, that is there is a linkage, that is
ethyl group
between the X atom and terminal nitrogen, then only it shows the maximum activity. But when there is a branching or increase in the carbon chain, number, that may lead to decreasing activity. But one of the example, that is a promethazine hydrochloride. In this promethazine hydrochloride, the X atom is linked to the terminal nitrogen through branching chain. That is isopropyl moiety, but the activity of this particular compound is not decreased. Why? Because this moiety having the phenothiazine group in its structure, so that's why it has the more potent activity. So due to the presence of phenothiazine group, even though it is having the branching chain between the X atom and terminal nitrogen, that is the isopropyl moiety, it shows the maximum activity. And another requirement is the substitution on the phenyl functional group. So when there is a substitution on the phenyl functional group, for example, here it is the X atom have two aryl substitution, AR and AR1. So on that AR, for example, AR having the phenyl substitution, in that phenyl group, when there is a para substitution like halogens, so when the halogens are substituted on the para position like chlorine and bromine, so in that case the activity will be increased. So here it is a comparison like phenyramine. So the phenyramine doesn't have any substitution on the phenyl group at para position, but in case of chlorophenyramine and bromophenyramine, in case of chlorophenyramine, which is having the chlorine substitution at para position on the phenyl functional group, and bromophenyramine has the bromine substitution at para position on the phenyl functional group. So these two have the more potent activity when compared to the phenyramine. And another requirement is the antihistaminic agents should be in dextroisomer form, then only it shows the maximum activity. So here the dextroisomer of antihistaminic, most of the antihistaminics shows the potent activity when compared to LEVO form of these antihistaminic agents. For example, in case of dexchlorofenaramine and trichloroidine. And in case of dexchlorofenaramine and dexbromophenaramine and trichloroidine, so all the dextro forms of these compounds has the more potent activity when compared to LEVO forms of these same compounds. And another requirement is introduction of basic cyclic rings. Into this terminal nitrogen also, so that may lead to increasing the antihistaminic activity. So these are the some requirements to a chemical structure to act as the antihistaminic, or that may lead to increasing the antihistaminic activity. Next, coming to some of the important antihistaminic agents, how they are synthesized and what are the properties and pharmacological use of these compounds. First one is diphenhydramine. So the brand names for this diphenhydramine is Benadryl and Bendylate. So this is the structure of diphenhydramine. When seeing this synthesis of diphenhydramine, the diphenhydramine is synthesized from the diphenyl methane. So the starting compound of this diphenhydramine is nothing but diphenyl methane. When this diphenyl methane is subjected to bromination or chlorination, sometimes they are subjected to chlorination, but here we mentioned as the bromination under the UV light. So it forms the bromodiphenyl methane. And when this bromodiphenyl methane is treated with dimethyl ethanol, so in presence of potassium carbonate, so and heat, it produces the diphenhydramine. So this is the synthesis process of this diphenhydramine. And coming to the properties, so it is a white crystalline powder, so which is soluble in water and alcohol. Coming to the pharmacological uses, it is having the antihistaminic activity. Along with this antihistaminic activity, it is also exhibits the antiemetic and sedative properties. Coming to the assay of this diphenhydramine, this can be assayed or estimated by the potentiometric method. This diphenhydramine can be estimated by potentiometric method. So when seeing the dose of this diphenhydramine, so the usual dose is 25 to 50 mg per day orally, maximum up to 3 times. Total dose is for about 400 mg per day. Coming to dosage form, it is available in the diphenhydramine solutions. When you see the individual structural activity relationship of this diphenhydramine, a small changes in chemical structure of this diphenhydramine that may lead to change in pharmacological activity. For example, in case of diphenhydramine has the ether linkage between the X atom and terminal nitrogen, and when there is an introduction of carbonyl group between this X atom and ether oxygen, so that may lead to the changing this antihistaminic agent to antispasmodic agent. So that means, so when introducing the carbonyl group between these two atoms, so that may the diphenhydramine is converted into diphenine. So this is the antispasmodic agent. So there is a small structural change leads to the another activity. Another important antihistaminic agent is trichloroidine hydrochloride. So this is a structure of trichloroidine hydrochloride. In this structure, the terminal nitrogen is entered into the heterocyclic system, and here it is when you see the synthesis of this trichloroidine hydrochloride, so it is synthesized from the 1-para-toluene ethanol when it is subjected to Mannich reaction. So this 1-para-toluene ethanol is subjected to Mannich reaction. So the Mannich reaction is nothing but alkylation of proton which is adjacent to the carbonyl group. So alkylation of the proton which is adjacent to the carbonyl group in the presence of formaldehyde and secondary or tertiary or primary amine. So here it is an example. Pyrrolidine is the example for secondary amine. So due to the presence of formaldehyde and this secondary amine, so there is a Mannich reaction occurs. So Mannich reaction is nothing but alkylation of proton which is adjacent to the carbonyl group. When the 1-para-toluene is treated with formaldehyde and pyrrolidine, it leads to the formation of intermediate, so which binds this 1-para-toluene to ether linkage and this pyrrolidine, and this intermediate is treated with magnesium bromide pyridine moiety, and there is a sequence of reactions like nucleophilic addition and salt hydrolysis is happening, and that may lead to the formation of this compound, and after the dehydration, so finally trichloroidine is produced. So this is the synthesis process of trichloroidine hydrochloride. And coming to the structural activity relationship of trichloroidine, as we already discussed in the general structural activity relationship of H1 antihistaminic agents, so the dextro forms or the trans form of this trichloroidine hydrochloride shows the maximum antihistaminic activity when compared to the cis form of this trichloroidine hydrochloride. So that means the trans form of this trichloroidine is active and cis form of this trichloroidine is inactive. Coming to the properties of this trichloroidine, which is a white crystalline powder which is practically insoluble in ether, soluble in water and ethanol. And the pharmacological activity of this trichloroidine confirms that the trans form of this trichloroidine shows the maximum activity when compared to cis form of trichloroidine hydrochloride. So the trans form of trichloroidine shows the 1000 times more activity when compared to cis form. When it comes to the assay of this trichloroidine hydrochloride, so this can be estimated by trichromatic method. Next, another important antihistaminic agent is promethazine hydrochloride, and this is the structure of promethazine hydrochloride, so which is having the phenothiazine group in this structure. And coming to this synthesis, of this promethazine hydrochloride. The promethazine hydrochloride is synthesized from the diphenylamine. So when this diphenylamine is treated with sulfur, molecular sulfur, in presence of iodine or aluminum chloride, it forms the phenothiazine group or the tricyclic ring system. And when it is treated with the dimethylaminoethyl chloride, when this tricyclic system is treated with the dimethylaminoethyl chloride, so then it forms the promethazine hydrochloride. Next, coming to the properties of promethazine hydrochloride, which is a white or faintly yellowish crystalline powder, highly soluble in water, soluble in alcohol and methylene chloride. And coming to the pharmacological activities, effective in perennial and seasonal allergic rhinitis, vasomotor rhinitis, allergic conjunctivitis, and some of the skin manifestations of urticaria, and it also shows some anti-serotonergic activity and local anesthetic properties. And it can be assayed by potentiometric method. And when you come to the dose of this promethazine hydrochloride, so which is about 20 to 50 mg per day. And coming to the H2 antagonist, so up to now we discussed about the H1 antagonist. And when you come to the H2 antagonist, these H2 antagonists are also called as H2 receptor blockers. We know that this histamine shows the actions at H1, H2, H3 and H4 receptors, and the activation of H2 receptors by the histamine may lead to the increasing gastric acid secretion or some of the actions like contraction of the isolated atria and inhibition of isolated uterus. So these are the actions of this H2 receptor, and these actions will be blocked by H2 receptor blockers, and thereby they are also used in the treatment of peptic ulcers. Examples of these H2 receptor blockers are cimetidine, famotidine and ranitidine. So these are the structures of cimetidine, famotidine and ranitidine. When it comes to the mechanism of action of this H2 receptor antagonist, so the general mechanism at the H2 receptor is nothing but, when you see in the general mechanism of H2 receptor antagonist, when the histamine is bind to H2 receptor, this is the H2 receptor, when the histamine is bind to the H2 receptor, so H2 receptor also a G protein coupled receptor. When the histamine is bind to this G protein coupled receptor, it produces the cyclic AMP, and this cyclic AMP ultimately increases the calcium, and this calcium influx will activate the proton pump, K plus H plus ATPase pump. So thereby high amount of gastric acid secretion occurs. And so when this H2 receptor antagonist competitively inhibit the histamine to bind to the H2 receptor, it decreases the cyclic AMP and thereby decreases the calcium, and so it doesn't activate the proton pump, and thereby it decreases the secretion of gastric acid. This is the way how the H2 receptor antagonist acts on the H2 receptor.
Here I am repeating the mechanism of action in a better way.
H2 receptor blockers are also called as H2 receptor antagonists. In order to understand how these drugs work, first we need to have a closer look at primary target, that is acid producing parietal cells of the stomach. Parietal cells has three types of receptors which control the acid production. They are muscarinic or acetylcholine receptor, gastrin receptor and histamine H2 receptor. The parasympathetic vagus nerve that innervates the gastrointestinal tract produces the acetylcholine, which act on acetylcholine receptor to increase the intracellular calcium. Next, the gastrin is the hormone which is produced by the G cells located in pyrotic gland acts on the gastrin receptor and increases the intracellular calcium as same as that of the acetylcholine. On the other hand, the gastrin stimulates the nearby enterochromatin-like cells to synthesize and secretes the histamine. Finally, the histamine released from the enterochromatin cells will act on H2 receptor and activates the adenocyclase, leading to increasing the intracellular cyclic AMP levels. Now, the increased intracellular cyclic AMP as well as intracellular calcium level or calcium ions leads to activation of protein kinases, which in turn stimulate the hydrogen potassium ATPase pump or proton pump, so that can able to secrete the H plus ions into the lumen of the stomach by the exchange of potassium. So, H2 receptor antagonist selectively blocks and effectively reduces the secretion of gastric acid. This makes the useful of H2 antagonist in treatment of gastric ulcers and gastroesophageal reflux diseases. And coming to the structural activity relationship of H2 receptor antagonist, and the imidazole ring is required to show the H2 receptor antagonistic activity. Not only the imidazole ring, and sometimes furan, thiophene, and thiazole ring also increases the potency and selectivity of H2 receptor antagonistic activity. The ring and the terminal nitrogen should be separated by 4 carbon atoms, so to show the maximum antagonistic activity in case of H2 receptor. But in case of H1 receptor, the X atom and terminal nitrogen is separated or linked by 2 carbon atom only. But in case of H2 receptor antagonist, the ring and the terminal nitrogen, so the ring and the terminal nitrogen is separated by the 4 carbon atoms to show the H2 receptor antagonistic activity. So another requirement is the isosteric thioether link is required to show this H2 receptor antagonistic activity. The another requirement to show the H2 receptor antagonistic activity is the terminal nitrogen group should be polar and it has non-basic substituents. So this is the requirement for showing the maximum antagonistic activity. So the terminal nitrogen should be polar and it should has the non-basic substituents, then only shows the maximum antagonistic activity. In general, the antagonistic activity of this H2 receptor antagonist depends upon the hydrophilic characteristics of this terminal nitrogen. The hydrophilic nature of this terminal nitrogen increases, the antihistaminic activity is decreases. Hydrophilic character of this nitrogen is decreases, the antagonistic activity of the particular compound is increases. That means there is a inverse relationship between the hydrophilic nature of the terminal nitrogen and antagonistic activity. So this is about the structural activity relationship of H2 receptor antagonist. And here we discussed about the one of the important antihistaminic agent, that is a H2 receptor antagonist. Here it is, we'll discuss about the cimetidine. So cimetidine can be synthesized by 2 routes. First route is, so it can be synthesized from the ethyl 5-methyl imidazole 4-carboxylate. So in this route, the cimetidine is synthesized from the ethyl 5-methyl imidazole 4-carboxylate. So first this one is subjected to hydrolysis, thereby it forms this intermediate. When it is treated with mercaptodiethylamine, it forms the intermediate like this. When this intermediate is treated with dimethyl cyano dithio iminocarboxylate, so this may lead to the formation of this intermediate. When this intermediate is treated with methylamine or methylthione, so that may lead to the formation of cimetidine. So this is the first route for the synthesis of cimetidine. The second route for the synthesis of cimetidine is, which is synthesized from the ethyl 2-chloroesteoestate. When this ethyl 2-chloroesteoestate is subjected to treating with formamide, and this forms this intermediate, and when there is a release of formate from this intermediate may lead to the this intermediate, that is a imidazole ring is formed, and this formed imidazole ring moiety is treated with the lithium aluminum hydroxide, so that may lead to the formation of this intermediate. When this intermediate is treated with mercaptodimethylamine, and this forms this intermediate, and this will be treated with dimethylcyano dithiol iminocarboxylate, and this forms this intermediate. And when this is treated with the methylamine or methylthiol, this forms the cimetidine. So these are the second route for synthesis of cimetidine. And coming to the properties of this cimetidine, so which is a white crystalline powder soluble in water and sparingly soluble in ethanol. And coming to the pharmacological actions of this cimetidine, it has the inhibiting capability for release of gastric acid. It prevents the actions like histamine mediated responses. It is also used for the treatment of peptic ulcers, and which has the weak anti-androgen activity. And there is a side effect of this cimetidine, that is gynecomastia, and can be estimated by potentiometric method. The oral dose of this cimetidine is nothing but 200 mg twice a day, and it can able to take about 400 mg at night. Up to now we discussed about the H2 receptor antagonists. So now we are going to discuss about the proton pump inhibitors. So here the proton pump inhibitors will directly act on the proton pump. So the difference between the proton pump inhibitors and H2 receptor antagonist. So in case of H2 receptor antagonist is nothing but, so they act on the H2 receptors and inhibit the histamine action at H2 receptor. So what is the histamine action on the H2 receptor? It increases the release of cyclic AMP, and that increases the calcium level, and that activates the proton pump, and that action is inhibited by the H2 receptor antagonist. But in case of proton pump inhibitors, so this directly act on the proton pump. So these are some examples of proton pump inhibitors. So first one is omeprazole, lansoprazole, or pantoprazole, rabeprazole. So that when you see in the chemical structure of these compounds, that is omeprazole, lansoprazole, pantoprazole, and rabeprazole, so in all the chemical structure, so it has the benzimidazole moiety, and this benzimidazole moiety is connected to the pyridine, which is having the substance, through sulfonyl group. So all the compounds having the similar structure except this rabeprazole. Okay. And coming to the mechanism of action, as I said that proton pump inhibitors directly act on the proton pump, that is a hydrogen potassium ATPase pump, and this hydrogen potassium ATPase pump will act or will release the gastric acid to the responses from the H2 receptor and muscarinic receptor. Proton pump will produce the gastric acid to the responses from H2 receptor and muscarinic receptors, and these proton pump inhibitors will inhibit the responses of H2 receptor and muscarinic receptor, so thereby it inactivates the proton pump, that ultimately leads to the decreasing the gastric acid into the GIT. So here I repeat that the proton pump inhibitor will directly act on the proton pump, that is a hydrogen potassium ATPase pump, and so that means this proton pump shows the action against to the responses from H2 receptor and muscarinic receptor, and that means when there is a response from the H2 receptor, muscarinic receptor, or from the gastrin, that means increasing the calcium levels, this proton pump is activated. But these proton pump inhibitors will block these responses from the H2 receptor, muscarinic receptor, and from the gastrin, so thereby this proton pump is inhibited, and that ultimately decrease the gastric acid secretion into the GIT. So this is the mechanism of action. When you see in the synthesis of this omeprazole, the starting compound for the synthesis of omeprazole is 4-methoxybenzo 1,2 diamine. When this compound is treated with carbon disulfide and sodium ethoxide, it forms the intermediate like this. That means the formation of benzimidazole ring, and this will be treated with this pyridine, which is having the substance, and then it forms this intermediate. And when it is treated with the metachloroperbenzoic acid, and it forms the omeprazole. So this is the synthesis process. First it is treated with the compound 4-methoxybenzene 1,2 diamine is treated with carbon disulfide and sodium ethoxide, and it forms this compound, that is the formation of the benzimidazole ring. And when it is treated with the pyridine, which is having the substance like this, and this will form this intermediate, and formed intermediate is treated with metachloroperbenzoic acid, it forms the omeprazole. And coming to the properties of this omeprazole, so which is a white hygroscopic powder soluble in water, alcohol and propyl glycol, and very slightly soluble in methylene chloride. And coming to the pharmacological use of this omeprazole, which is used in the treatment of peptic ulcer, gastric ulcer and pathological hypersecretory conditions. This video up to now we discussed about the general structural activity relationship of H1 antagonists and some important H1 antagonists along with their synthesis and pharmacological uses. And then after we discussed about the H2 receptor antagonists and proton pump inhibitors. Thank you.